Today we're focusing on 3 war films about Caucasus. So we have chosen for you 3 war films about Caucasus, which in our opinion are worth to watch. So maybe you're asking yourself about which war? So 3 different wars really that happened in the Caucasus since the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Welcome to the Caucasus podcast, where we talk about literature, culture, history, and more. The Caucasus podcast is brought to you by Języki Kaukazu, Languages of the Caucasus. Let's get started with today's episode.
Before we dive in, just a reminder that the text version of each and every episode you will find also on our website in the form of article, and always there is a link waiting for you in the description of each and every episode, so below you will find that as well. So let's get started with the movies, with the films that we have promised you today. So unfortunately, for several decades already, war has been a constant piece of life in this particular region, and the fact for surviving war and somehow also preparing for the next potential one has already left quite a mark on each and every generation of each, I would say, Caucasian nations. Both we are talking about south and the north of Caucasus, and that is why, in my opinion, without understanding really this aspect of Caucasian reality, it may be a little bit difficult at least to fully get to know Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan or Northern Caucasian republics. That is why we thought today we'll tell you more about the films. So there are numerous war films about Caucasus, I would say. Some of them are more objective, some of them are pure propagandist purposes, some are more artistic, some directed like an action movie. So in today's episode we talk about 3 war films about Caucasus, and the ones that are more, I would say, not propagandist, and to be more precise, we'll cover war in Abkhazia, in Karabakh, and in Chechnya. So that is planned for today, and we'll focus on the films that also give you a, I would say, more generic understanding of the conflict as such. Yes, so just a disclaimer before we dive into the first film, just not to repeat it after each and every film that we'll have for you today. So first of all, we wanted to say that we do not support by choosing those films or any other film. We are not, to any extent, do not want to indicate our support to neither side of the conflict. And in my opinion, there are really no true winners at any war, any at all, and there are only survivors, people who, I would say, and their close ones whom this conflict influenced a lot. So that is why we do not want to indicate any support, any of that. So let's start with the first film, war film about Karabakh. Let's start with Karabakh conflict. And while we are recording and preparing this particular episode of the Caucasus podcast, so in October 2023, it seems like Karabakh para-states ceased to exist before our eyes, really. We have chosen this film earlier, however, I'm quite positive that the war and the war films about Caucasus, and this particular one we want to tell you more about, is still quite actual, both for Karabakh and the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis native from that region. That is why we decided to keep it. And the film is called Yeva, and it was directed by Anahid Abad in 2017. This Armenian film tells us a story of Yeva, this young woman, young widow, and after a tragic death of her husband, Yeva decides to leave Yerevan, I would say run away even from her parents-in-law, who are quite controlling and they are wealthy people, so this combination is not in her favor. She runs away way to Karabakh. She's a doctor that she's living in, working in a hospital in Yerevan, but does not want to be recognized by anyone in the village in the Karabakh, that she's coming there, and she's going there with her daughter. So therefore she looks for another job, but we know as viewers, just there is a even bigger mystery staying between that story in this film about war in Karabakh. So we are being told that Sieva goes to Karabakh, to Artsakh in Armenian language, to stay with her friends. Besides seeing her life, so how does her life changes and what happens with her life when going to Karabakh, we also have a possibility to observe the reality of life in a small village in this particular region. So we see how people try to live with the mark of war and the mark that war really has left them. And we are talking not only about the war that passed, but so-called frozen conflict, that it was not that time so frozen in the Karabakh. So some war films about Caucasus, I believe mainly the good ones, show you exactly this multi-dimensional perspective and complexity of each military conflict. And this is what you get in the film Yeva as well. So you can rent this war film about Karabakh, about Caucasus, on several internet platforms as any other film that we're talking about today. We will not suggest any. You can just Google it on your own and decide. And just to add, in 2018, this particular film got nominated as Armenian film for the Oscars. That's a foreign film. So we now move to across the mountains to Chechnya. So the next war film will be about Chechnya, and we go to the Second Chechen War. And the film I want to recommend to you today, this is Alexandra. And it's not the newest production, let's say, because it was shot in 2007 and it was directed by Alexander Sokurov. But I think still it is very, very good movie. So we travel in time and in space to the Second Chechen War. It took place between 1999 and 2009, but the main military actions took place in the first 9 months, and this is more or less the time when we meet Alexandra. So in the moment that Alexandra Nikolaevna visits her grandson named Denis, and Denis serves in military base in Chechnya, as you may probably assume, part of Russian army. He's senior lieutenant. So during her stay, Alexandra visits the military base, talks to Russian army soldiers as well, but in the second day she decides to go to the town, to go outside the military base. The local civilians, let's say, are a bit skeptical of her presence, to say the least, because she is a Russian civilian in Chechnya during the war. Shopping on the market, because she decided to go in the market, she starts to talk to a lady of similar age named Malika. And this interaction, getting to know each other by those two elder women, mothers, wives, grandmothers of soldiers of both sides, was one of, I would say, the most heartbreaking stories in the whole film for me, really. And although I saw this film in 2007, this film about war in Chechnya in 2007, till now, as I mentioned, I really perceive it as one of the best films about this particular war, and I would even say about, in general, conflicts in the Caucasus. Maybe it was because, the additional impression was because I was watching that in an empty screening room almost in Poland. There was just one person besides me sitting there. Maybe additional factor that I'm more than sure, maybe not maybe, but I'm more than sure that Malika, the fact that she was telling her story about tough life conditions that changed really during the war, the whole combination of that really still makes me believe this is one of the best films. And I do recommend that a lot. Okay, so it's time to come back to South Caucasus. Yes, and we go to Abkhazia. We are traveling the most in past that we were today, so to 1992. And when I was choosing the films for today's episode, for the Caucasus podcast, I thought it really cannot be aired without tangerines. Then this Estonian Georgian film had its premiere in 2016, and it was directed by Zaza Ushuradze. Maybe you have already heard about tangerines, I don't know, but what I thought for today, I will add you like my perspective on this war film about Caucasus. So we are in this film in Tangerines in a moment when Abkhazia fights independence from Georgia. But what is often not said about this region and the conflict in general, it is that Abkhazia was in that time and in the Soviet Union not only inhabited by Abkhazians and Georgians, and before Soviet Union as well, there were living other nations, for example, Germans, Greeks, and Estonians. So in Tangerines, we see the village where Estonians mainly lived. So this is, let's call it Estonian village. We get to know Ivo, old owner of the Tangerines orchard, just before the harvest time, because we are like the late autumn of 1992, and he decides not to flee the Abkhazia, as many of his friends and neighbors have done it during the war. And the front is coming back closer and closer to his village. So as a result, he finds one wounded soldier and then the other. The case is that the one is Georgian, but the other one is Chechen. So it's worth to mention and worth to remember in this piece of the thread that Abkhazian army was also, and Abkhazian troops was also supported by Chechens. Just remember, when we talk about armies in those times in general and the troops, remember that it's slightly different, to say the least, what we know now, because that was the times where there were like military troops, paramilitary troops, and not always each and every troop and group of soldiers were part of the same structure. Let's say everything was a little bit still creating. Then that happened in the whole region, let's say like this. So Chechens, some of the troops were supporting the Abkhazians. I think this is why it happens like that, and what are the relations. This is a maybe interesting episode, like other episodes. Let us know in the comment whether that would be also a piece of history interesting for you, why and what are the dependencies between those and Abkhazians and northern Caucasian other nations. But we have here, coming back to Tangerines, we have two soldiers of the opposite sides under one roof. So this is not really an action movie like, for example, Trip to Karabakh, about which we talked in the 6th episode of the Caucasus podcast. I'd say this film, Tangerines, focus more about interactions and dialogues between those three men, because together with Ivo, who is Estonian, so we have Georgian, Chechen and Estonian, and it really shows the complexity of the Caucasus in almost each and every aspect of this particular region. That is why we do recommend to watch it or rewatch it if you have watched it as well, just to have in mind this perspective. So Tangerines, also as Yeva, was one of the nominated films to Oscars. It happened in 2015, and it was nominated as Estonian film for this grouped category as foreign films. Okay, so we've gone through our 3 films for today. We have prepared 3 war films about Caucasus for you today. And to be honest, when I was preparing and writing and now even recording this particular episode, it is quite difficult and much more difficult than I imagined, really, because talking about those Caucasian films, it got me really the feeling, I would say, like reliving it once again, the whole story. And this, however, very unpleasant feeling. Take in mind the topic that we're talking about. I believe that this is something worth to embrace, and maybe this is one of the reasons why we can watch films like that, because it is of course not like pure entertainment as any other film like comedy, but with war films we try to go deeper, we try to understand more about this region, about the nations, about the connections, etc, etc. So maybe it is worth to stop for a moment and think what are the consequences of war and any military conflict. And this is really can be seen on the Caucasus, because many of those happened in the last 30 years. I hope we have helped you a little bit to like start watching and thinking which film to start watching about Caucasus, about those particular topics. So if you want to expand, for example, your Caucasian library of films, let's call it that way, I do recommend adding those 3 war films about Caucasus, or maybe as an alternative, choose just the one conflict, just to not to get overwhelmed with that. Choose one conflict, the least about this region and about this conflict, so you can widen your knowledge about Caucasus. I hope that with those films, I was able to show you that on the Caucasus, everything is interdependent. Exactly. So I leave you with those 3 films. I hope you liked it. If you like episodes like that, I would say a little bit more serious. I tried not to make it very, very serious episode. However, the topic is quite serious, so we cannot change that much around. I hope that you liked this episode and liked our recommendations. So let us know in the comments. Maybe you have watched already some of them, or you have another one that you want to recommend to us and anyone who is watching and listening to our podcast. So let us know in the comments. And you can also write us about that in just responding to our newsletter that we are sending weekly, so to the Caucasian Mail. And if you are not yet subscriber of our newsletter, the link for that is also in the description. Okay, so that is all for today. Think which film you want to see first, and thank you. I'm saying you bye bye and see you in the next episode.